"Get her out of my sight," Richard Danvers snarled, his face crimson with rage, his finger stabbing the air toward the black woman standing before him. "I don't want to look at her for another second." 200 guests froze. Champagne paused mid-sip. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the Danvers ballroom turned to watch Helen Turner, the maid who'd just been called things that shouldn't be said in polite company, let alone screamed across a room full of the city's elite. She stood there, hands clasped, face unreadable, while the most powerful man in the room tried to destroy her in front of everyone who mattered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's continue. The Danvers estate mansion perched above the city like a crown of glass and marble that Thursday evening, its windows blazing with light that mocked the darkness below. Inside the grand ballroom, the annual charity gala was in full swing, though charity was merely a word the wealthy used to dress up their networking. The clink of champagne flutes, the whisper of silk gowns across Italian marble, the low murmur of seven-figure deals disguised as pleasantries. The air itself seemed perfumed with money, aged whiskey, imported roses, and the particular scent of people who'd never heard the word no. The mansion had stood on this hill for nearly 40 years, a monument to power and privilege. Its marble columns gleamed white against the night sky. Its sprawling grounds stretched across 5 acres of manicured lawns and imported gardens. Every window, every archway, every piece of crown molding spoke of wealth so old and established it no longer needed to announce itself. The Danvers name was carved into the city's foundation as deeply as the steel beams that held up its skyscrapers. At the center of the ballroom stood the host table, elevated on a platform beneath an antique chandelier that had once hung in a French palace. High-backed chairs upholstered in midnight blue velvet. Place settings of gold-rimmed china that cost more than a car. A single arrangement of white orchids that would die by morning, because even the flowers here were disposable. This was where the Danvers family held court, surrounded by velvet ropes that whispered a simple message. You are not one of us. Richard Danvers sat at the head of that table, one arm draped casually over the back of his chair, the other holding a glass of scotch older than most of his employees. He was in his early 30s but carried himself like inherited wealth had frozen him at 22, all confidence, no substance. His tailored Tom Ford suit fit perfectly. His Patek Philippe watch caught the light with every dismissive wave of his hand. But it was the smirk that truly defined him. That razor-thin smile that said he'd never faced a consequence in his life and had no intention of starting now. Richard Danvers, sole heir to Danvers Global Properties. Billionaire by birth. Nightmare by choice. Around him sat his usual circle, a city councilman's wife desperate for relevance, 2 investors from his father's firm laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and a tech CEO whose startup Richard had publicly humiliated into selling for pennies on the dollar just last year. They all smiled. They all laughed. They all pretended this was where they belonged. The room buzzed with the kind of conversation that happened when everyone present believed themselves important. Stock portfolios. Real estate ventures. Political donations large enough to buy influence but small enough to remain legal. These were people who'd never stood in line at a grocery store, never worried about a medical bill, never questioned whether they deserved the space they occupied in the world. Then Helen Turner entered from the service entrance. She was in her mid-30s, wearing the standard uniform required of all household staff. Black dress, white apron, sensible shoes that made no sound against the floor. Her dark skin seemed to glow under the harsh ballroom lights, and she'd pulled her natural hair back into a neat bun that took 20 minutes every morning to perfect. No jewelry. No makeup beyond a touch of lip balm. Nothing that might draw attention or suggest that she thought herself equal to the guests she served. Her face held an expression that had been carefully constructed over years. Pleasant, neutral, forgettable. The kind of calm that comes from swallowing your words so often you forget what your real voice sounds like. She'd worked in this house for 3 months now, long enough to know the rhythms of these events. Long enough to recognize the faces that appeared at every gala, every fundraiser, every excuse the wealthy created to gather and congratulate themselves. Long enough to perfect the art of invisibility. She approached the host table carrying a silver tray with fresh champagne glasses, her movements practiced and precise. She'd learned early that the key to surviving in spaces like this was to become part of the furniture, noticed only when needed, and forgotten the moment you stepped away. "Excuse me, Mr. Danvers," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. "Your champagne, sir. Imported from—" Richard didn't look at her. He simply held up one hand while continuing his conversation, forcing her to stand there, tray extended, until he decided to acknowledge her existence. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Helen's arms began to ache, but she didn't move, didn't shift her weight, didn't sigh. Finally, he glanced over. His eyes swept across her face with all the interest one might show a piece of furniture. "Just put it down." Helen set the tray on the table, careful not to let the glasses clink. As she turned to leave, Richard's voice cut through the air. "Actually, wait." She stopped, turned back. "Yes, sir." Richard leaned forward, his smirk widening as he noticed his guests were now watching. "I've been meaning to ask. Do they not have standards anymore for who they let work in my mansion?" The table went quiet. Someone set down his fork. The string quartet continued playing, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Helen's expression didn't change. "Sir." "I mean," Richard continued, his voice rising just enough to carry to the neighboring tables, "I'm sitting here trying to enjoy a $10,000 evening, and I have to watch this." He gestured vaguely in her direction. "Walking around like she belongs here. Do you know how much we pay in taxes? How much does my family contribute to this city? And this is the help they send us." A nervous laugh rippled through the nearby guests. The councilman's wife covered her mouth with her napkin, eyes wide with scandalized delight. One of the investors shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. No one ever did. Helen stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her. Every muscle in her body wanted to respond, to defend herself, to remind him that she was human. But she'd learned long ago that responding only made it worse. "I apologize if my service has been unsatisfactory, Mr. Danvers. Would you like me to send it to someone else?" "Unsatisfactory." Richard threw back his head and laughed. "That's one word for it. You people always have such polite little phrases, don't you? Always so sorry. Always so apologetic." He mimicked her voice cruelly, drawing more uncomfortable chuckles from his table. "You want to know what I think? I think they're scraping the bottom of the barrel these days. Probably pulled you straight out of some public housing project and stuck you in an apron." The whispers started then. A woman in a diamond necklace leaned toward her companion. "Can you believe they still hire people like that?" A man in a tuxedo shook his head slowly, as if witnessing something distasteful but predictable. Helen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. Years of practice had taught her how to separate her body from her mind, how to float above moments like these and survive them without breaking. "I understand your concerns, sir. I'll speak with the house manager immediately." But Richard wasn't finished. He never was. Men like him never stopped until they'd extracted every ounce of satisfaction from their cruelty. "Oh, you'll speak with the manager?" He stood now, his movements deliberately theatrical, playing to his audience. "Let me save you the trouble." He turned toward the door where Gerald, the head of household staff, was already rushing over, his face pale with panic. "Gerald! Get over here!" Gerald practically ran to the table, already bowing. "Mr. Danvers, is there a problem?" "A problem!" Richard grabbed his champagne glass and, with a casual flick of his wrist, tossed the contents directly onto the white tablecloth. That's when the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The golden liquid spread like a stain across the pristine linen, dripping onto the floor. "The problem is that I'm paying for excellence and getting this." He pointed at Helen without looking at her. "I want her fired. Right now. Tonight. And if she's still in this house in 5 minutes, I'll call my father and we'll see how long you keep your job." The ballroom had gone almost completely silent now. Even the string quartet seemed to be playing more softly. Every eye was on Helen, some with pity, most with the detached curiosity of people watching an accident they were grateful not to be involved in. Gerald wrung his hands, his voice breaking. Mr. Danvers, please. I'm sure we can resolve this. 5 minutes, Richard repeated, each word sharp as a blade. He was enjoying this now, feeding off the attention, the power, the certainty that he could destroy someone's livelihood with a snap of his fingers and face no consequences. This was what wealth meant to him. Not the mansions or the cars or the watches. It was this. The ability to humiliate someone and have an audience applaud. He turned back to Helen, his smirk widening. You know what your problem is? People like you think you can just walk into places like this and pretend you're one of us. But you're not. You'll never be. And the sooner you accept that, the easier your pathetic little life will become. The councilman's wife gasped, though whether from shock or delight was unclear. One of the investors looked away, suddenly fascinated by his wine glass. The tech CEO pulled out his phone, already documenting the moment for later. Gerald turned to Helen, his expression a mixture of apology and desperation. Miss Turner, please. Come with me. But Helen didn't move. Not yet. She stood there for one more moment, looking at Richard Danvers, at his smug face, his expensive suit, his complete certainty that he would face no consequences for this moment. Then her gaze swept across the room. The guests in their designer clothes. The servers were frozen in the corners. The marble, gold, and crystal that surrounded them all like a beautiful cage. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this. 3 months working in this house, serving these people, enduring their casual cruelty while she gathered what she needed. 3 months of being invisible while she waited for the perfect moment. This was it. She began to walk toward the service exit, Gerald beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow as if to guide her away faster. The whispers followed her every step. Judgments passed in hushed tones. Pity offered and withdrawn in the same breath. Schadenfreude dressed up as concern. I heard she barely graduated high school, someone murmured. What did she expect, really? Another voice added. The Danvers family has standards. Always have. Richard returned to his seat, already reaching for a fresh glass of champagne, already moving on to his next story. He'd forgotten about Helen before she'd even left the room. That's how little she mattered to him. But just before she reached the doorway, Helen stopped. She turned back to face the ballroom, to face Richard Danvers and his smirk and his power and his absolute certainty that he had won. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the string quartet fell silent between movements. And she spoke, her voice clear and calm and loud enough to reach every corner of that gilded room. I own this house now. 5 words. That's all it took. The silence that followed wasn't like the one before. This was different. Heavier. Dense enough to choke on. Someone's champagne glass paused halfway to their lips. A woman's hand froze on her pearl necklace. A server dropped a napkin and didn't bend to pick it up. Richard's smirk faltered. Just for a second. Just long enough for confusion to flicker across his face before it hardened into something uglier. What did you just say? Helen didn't repeat herself. She simply stood there, her posture straight, her hands no longer clasped submissively but hanging relaxed at her sides. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The invisible maid was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. You heard me, she said quietly. Richard pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the marble. Is this some kind of joke? He looked around the room, inviting others to share in his incredulity. Did you all hear that? The help thinks she owns my house. But no one laughed this time. Something in Helen's voice, in her stance, in the absolute certainty in her eyes had shifted the atmosphere. The guests glanced nervously at each other, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate entertainment or if something genuine was unfolding. Your house. Helen's voice remained steady, almost gentle. That's interesting. Tell me, Richard, do you know the original owner of this estate? Richard's face flushed deeper. My father bought this property 30 years ago. Everyone knows that. Bought it, Helen repeated, as if tasting the word. Is that what he told you? The room had gone completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, frozen in place like statues. Gerald stood beside Helen, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard demanded, but there was something new in his voice now. Something that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. Helen took a single step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Richard take a step back. "My mother built this house," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Catherine Turner. She was an architect and a developer before your father ever set foot in this city. She designed every column, every archway, every piece of crown molding in this building. She poured her life savings into it. Her legacy." "That's impossible," Richard said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Is it?" Helen reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it up, not opening it, just letting everyone see it existed. "This is the original deed to this property, dated 1985. Signed by Catherine Turner. My mother." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The councilman's wife leaned toward her companion, whispering urgently. One of the investors pulled out his phone, already searching for information. "That doesn't prove anything," Richard said, but he was grasping now, his earlier confidence crumbling like sand. "My father bought this property legally. There are records. Documentation." "There are indeed," Helen agreed. "Documentation of how your father manipulated my mother's business partners. How he exploited a loophole in the financing agreement. How he pushed her out of her own company and forced her to sell the property for a fraction of its value. How he built his empire on the ruins of hers." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His face had gone from crimson to pale in the space of 30 seconds. Helen continued, her voice never rising, never breaking. "My mother died 3 years ago. Alone. Broken. Convinced she'd lost everything. But before she died, she told me the truth. She told me about the Danvers family. About what they did. And she told me where she'd hidden the original documents. The real documents." She took another step forward. "So I came here. I took a job in my own mother's house. I served the family that destroyed her. I smiled while you treated me like I was nothing. And I waited. I gathered evidence. I contacted lawyers. I prepared." "You're lying," Richard said, but there was no conviction in it. "You're just some maid trying to." "I'm Catherine Turner's daughter," Helen interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "And as of 3 days ago, following the completion of a lengthy legal process that your father's lawyers tried desperately to block, I am the legal heir to this estate. The probate court ruled in my favor. The property reverts to the Turner family. To me." She finally unfolded the paper in her hand and held it up. Even from a distance, people could see the official seal, the signatures, and the legal letterhead. "So no, Richard," she said quietly. "This isn't your house. It never was. It was stolen from my mother, and now I'm taking it back." The room exploded into noise. Guests stood, some rushing toward the doors, others pulling out phones. The councilman's wife looked like she might faint. Gerald stumbled backward, his hand over his mouth. The investors at Richard's table were already whispering urgently to each other, probably calculating how this would affect their business dealings with the Danvers family. But Richard just stood there, frozen, his face a mask of shock and fury and disbelief. Helen folded the paper carefully and returned it to her pocket. Then she looked around the ballroom one last time, at the mansion her mother had built, at the life that had been stolen from her family. "I'll give you all until Monday to vacate the premises," she said calmly. "After that, I'll be moving in. And Gerald," she turned to the house manager, "you're welcome to stay on if you'd like. Under new management, of course. Better management." Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her head high, her step steady. Behind her, the Danvers empire began to crumble, brought down not by violence or vengeance, but by 5 simple words and the truth they carried. The Maid had just reclaimed her throne. Helen didn't go far. She walked through the service exit into the staff corridor, but instead of heading to the servants' quarters as everyone expected, she stopped just beyond the doorway. Gerald followed her, his face still pale, his hands trembling. "Miss Turner, I don't understand. Is this real?" Helen turned to face him, and for the first time that evening, her expression softened. "It's real, Gerald. Every word of it. And I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Behind them, the ballroom had erupted into chaos. Through the partially open door, they could hear Richard's voice rising above the din, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Everyone, please calm down," he was saying, though his voice cracked with barely contained panic. "This is clearly some kind of scam. Some desperate attempt by a disgruntled employee to—" Helen pulled out her phone and began typing. Gerald watched her, confusion still written across his face. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Calling my lawyer," Helen replied calmly. "We've been preparing for this moment for 3 years. He needs to know it's finally happening." Back in the ballroom, Richard had managed to corral some of his guests back to their seats, though most remained standing, phones out, already spreading the news to their networks. The story would be all over social media within the hour. Billionaire's son confronted by Maid claiming ownership of family estate. The headlines would write themselves. Richard's voice grew louder, more desperate. "My father has owned this property for 3 decades. There are legal documents, sales records, tax filings. This woman is clearly unstable. Gerald!" He turned toward the doorway, searching for the house manager. "Gerald, get back in here and remove this woman from the premises. Now!" But Gerald didn't move. He stood beside Helen, watching her make her call, slowly beginning to understand that something fundamental had just shifted in the world he thought he knew. Helen's lawyer answered on the second ring. "Helen, is it done?" "It's done," she said quietly. "He reacted exactly as we predicted. Publicly humiliated me in front of 200 witnesses. I have an audio recording of everything." She touched her collar, where a small device was hidden beneath the fabric of her uniform. "Every word, every slur, every threat." "Perfect," her lawyer replied. "That gives us grounds for the discrimination lawsuit on top of everything else. I'll file the papers first thing Monday morning. Are you safe?" "I'm fine," Helen said. "Better than fine, actually." She ended the call and looked at Gerald. "You should go back in there. Tell him I've left the property. Tell him whatever he needs to hear to calm down. But Gerald," she placed a gentle hand on his arm, "start looking for employment records. The payroll documents. Anything that shows how the staff has been treated over the years. I'm going to need it." Gerald nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. There's a lot, Miss Turner. More than you probably know." "I'm counting on it," Helen said. She turned to leave, but Gerald called after her. "Miss Turner? Your mother. I remember her. She used to visit the construction site when I first started working here, back in '85. She was kind to me. Treated me like I mattered." Helen stopped, her back to him, her shoulders suddenly tense. "Thank you for telling me that." "I'm sorry," Gerald said quietly. "I'm sorry for what happened to her. And I'm sorry I didn't know. I should have known." Helen nodded but didn't turn around. She couldn't let him see the tears that had suddenly formed in her eyes. Not yet. Not until this was finished. She walked away, leaving the chaos of the ballroom behind her. Inside the ballroom, Richard was pacing like a caged animal. Most of the guests had left by now, making hurried excuses about early mornings and prior commitments. The ones who remained were the closest to the family, those whose fortunes were tied too tightly to the Danvers name to simply walk away. The councilman's wife sat rigidly in her chair, her face frozen in an expression of calculated neutrality. The 2 investors huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones. The tech CEO had disappeared entirely. Richard's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face went even paler. His father. "Don't answer it," one of the investors said. "Not until you have a plan. Not until you know what you're going to say." But Richard answered anyway. He had to. "You didn't ignore calls from Marcus Danvers." "Dad, I can handle this," he said before his father could speak. "It's just some crazy woman making wild accusations. We'll have our lawyers." He fell silent, listening. His face cycled through a series of expressions: defensiveness, confusion, then slowly dawning horror. "What do you mean you know about it?" Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean you've been expecting this?" More silence. Richard sank into his chair, the phone pressed to his ear, all the arrogance draining out of him like water from a broken glass. "But you always said you bought this property fair and square. You said." He stopped, listened. His hand began to shake. "I see. Yes. I understand. No, I'll take care of it. Yes, sir." He ended the call and sat there, staring at nothing. "What did he say?" the councilman's wife asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Richard didn't answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "He said it's true. All of it. The Turner woman, the manipulation of the business deal, everything. He said he thought he'd buried it deep enough that it would never surface. He said." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He said I should have kept my mouth shut instead of making a scene. That I just handed her exactly what she needed to destroy us." The investors exchanged glances. One of them stood. "Richard, I think we need to discuss our partnership terms. Given this new development." "Get out," Richard said quietly. "Excuse me. I said get out," Richard roared, standing so violently his chair toppled backward. "All of you, get out of my house." "Your house," the councilman's wife said archly. "Are you certain it's still yours?" She threw her nose up and stormed out of the house. The remaining guests fled. Within minutes, Richard was alone in the ballroom, surrounded by the debris of the ruined party. Overturned glasses, abandoned plates of food, napkins scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. He walked to the window and looked out over the city, at the light spreading below like a carpet of stars. This view, this house, this life, it had all been built on a lie. And now that lie was coming home to roost. His phone buzzed with incoming messages, news alerts, social media notifications. The story was already spreading. #Danvers scandal was trending. Someone had recorded video of the confrontation. It was being shared thousands of times. Richard threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, but it didn't make him feel any better. Nothing would make him feel better, because deep down, beneath all the denial and the rage, he knew the truth. Helen Turner wasn't bluffing. She had the evidence. She had the legal standing. And worst of all, she had the moral high ground. Everything his father had built, everything Richard had inherited, everything he'd taken for granted his entire life had been stolen. And now it was being taken back. Helen sat in her small apartment across town, the one she'd rented 3 months ago when she'd taken the job at the Danvers estate. It was a far cry from the mansion she'd just left, but it was hers. Paid for with her own money. Earned through her own work. Her laptop was open on the small kitchen table, files spread across the screen. Years of research. Decades of hidden documents. Bank records showing suspicious transfers. Legal filings that had been buried in obscure county archives. Testimony from people her mother had worked with, people who remembered what really happened. Her lawyer's face appeared on the video call window. "Helen, I've been watching the social media feeds. This is bigger than we anticipated. The story is everywhere." "Good," Helen said. "Let it spread. Let everyone see what the Danvers family really is." "We'll file the fraud lawsuit Monday morning," her lawyer continued. "Based on what you've given me, we have grounds for civil RICO charges. Corporate fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. And now, with tonight's recording, we can add workplace discrimination and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "How long until we have a court date?" "For the estate claim? We already have one. It's been scheduled for 3 weeks from now. The judge has reviewed the preliminary evidence and agreed to hear the case. As for the other lawsuits..." He paused. "Helen, this is going to get ugly. The Danvers family won't go down without a fight. They'll try to destroy your credibility. They'll dig into your past. They'll make your life hell. Helen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let them try. I've been preparing for this my entire adult life. I know exactly what they're going to do. And I have evidence for everything. She clicked through the files on her screen, showing her lawyer. I have emails between Marcus Danvers and his business partners discussing how to force my mother out. I have recordings of phone calls where they planned the leveraged buyout that bankrupted her company. I have bank records showing money transferred to offshore accounts. I have testimony from 3 former Danvers employees willing to testify about the family's business practices. Her lawyer whistled low. You've been thorough. My mother spent the last 15 years of her life broken, Helen said quietly. Destroyed by what they did to her. She died thinking she'd failed, thinking she'd lost everything. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because it's right. Because the truth matters. Because people like the Danvers family need to face consequences. You understand this will change your life, her lawyer said. Once these lawsuits are public, once the media really digs in, there's no going back. You'll be in the spotlight. Every detail of your life will be scrutinized. I know, Helen said. I'm ready. She looked at the photo on her desk. Her mother, young and smiling, standing in front of an architectural model of the Danvers mansion. Back when it was still her dream. Back before everything fell apart. I'm ready, Helen repeated, more to her mother's photo than to her lawyer. I'm finally ready. By Monday morning, Helen Turner's name was everywhere. The first article appeared in the City Chronicle at 6:47 a.m., written by a business reporter who someone at the gala had tipped off. Maid claims ownership of Danvers estate. Explosive allegations rock prominent family. Within an hour, it had been picked up by 3 major news networks. By 9 a.m., Helen's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, producers, talk show hosts. Everyone wanted an interview, a statement, a piece of the story that was rapidly consuming the city's attention. She ignored most of them. But she did accept one call from Diane Chen, an investigative journalist known for taking down corrupt corporations. They met at a small coffee shop far from Helen's apartment, far from anywhere the paparazzi might think to look. Tell me everything, Diane said, her recorder already running. And don't leave anything out. Helen did. She told the story her mother had whispered on her deathbed, the story of Catherine Turner's architectural firm, how she designed the mansion as her masterpiece, how Marcus Danvers had befriended her, gained her trust, then systematically dismantled her business from the inside. She explained the fraudulent contracts, the manipulated loans, the business partners who'd been paid off to betray Catherine. And you have proof of all this? Diane asked. Helen slid a USB drive across the table. Everything. Documents. Recordings. Testimony. It's all there. Diane picked up the drive, her eyes gleaming with the look of a journalist who knows they're holding dynamite. This is going to destroy them. That's the idea, Helen said quietly. The interview aired that evening on the primetime news. Diane Chen sat across from Helen in the studio, the city skyline visible through the windows behind them, and let Helen tell her story to millions of viewers. My mother built that house with her own 2 hands, Helen said, looking directly into the camera. She poured her life into it. Her dreams. Her savings. And the Danvers family stole it from her. They destroyed her business, her reputation, and eventually, her will to live. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. The response was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted. Hashtag Justice for Catherine began trending within minutes. Hashtag Danvers scandal hit #1 worldwide by the end of the hour. People shared the interview, dissected every word, took sides with the fierce certainty of those who'd never met anyone involved but felt entitled to an opinion anyway. Some rallied behind Helen. Finally, someone standing up to these billionaire thieves. This is why we need to eat the rich. Her mother's story broke my heart. Helen is a hero. Others defended the Danvers family. Innocent until proven guilty, people. She's just a gold digger trying to cash in. The Danvers family has contributed millions to this city. One disgruntled employee doesn't change that. But the tide was shifting. And everyone could feel it. At Danvers Global Properties headquarters, Marcus Danvers sat in his corner office, watching the interview on mute. He didn't need to hear the words. He could read his destruction in his son's text messages, in the emails flooding his inbox, in the calls from business partners that his assistant was frantically screening. His phone rang. The board chairman. "Marcus, we need to talk about Richard." "He's my son," Marcus said, though he knew where this was going. "He's also the public face of a company that's currently being accused of fraud, discrimination, and corporate corruption. The stock is down 18% since this morning. We've had 3 major clients request meetings to discuss their options." Translation: they're running for the exits. Marcus closed his eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Richard needs to step down. Temporarily, at least. Until this blows over. We need to show we're taking this seriously. We need distance from the scandal. He'll never agree to that. Then make him agree. Or we'll vote him out. We have the authority, Marcus, and you know it. This isn't personal. It's business. And right now, Richard is bad for business." The call ended. Marcus sat in silence, staring at the city below. 40 years he'd spent building this empire. 40 years of strategic moves, calculated risks, ruthless decisions that had seemed justified at the time. And now it was all unraveling because his idiot son couldn't keep his mouth shut at a dinner party. No, that wasn't fair. It was unraveling because of what Marcus himself had done to Catherine Turner all those years ago. Richard had just struck the match, but Marcus had built the house of cards. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. "Sir, there are reporters in the lobby. Security is trying to remove them, but they're refusing to leave. They're demanding a statement. Tell them no comment. Sir, they're asking about the allegations. About Catherine Turner. About the mansion. About—" She hesitated. "About the offshore accounts." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What offshore accounts?" "It's in the article that I just posted. The investigative piece. They have bank records, transfers, dates and amounts." She handed him her tablet. The article was devastating. Diane Chen had done her homework. Or rather, Helen had done it for her. Every shady deal. Every questionable transaction. Every penny that Marcus had thought was safely hidden away was now laid bare for the world to see. Corporate fraud allegations against Danvers Global. Evidence suggests decades of illegal activity. The article didn't just cover the Catherine Turner situation. It went deeper. Other business deals. Other people who'd been pushed out, bought out, or bankrupted. A pattern of predatory practices stretching back to the company's founding. Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. News alerts. Market updates. Messages from lawyers, accountants, board members, all saying the same thing in different words. "We're in trouble." Richard Danvers walked into his father's office without knocking. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit rumpled. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Have you seen it?" he demanded. "Have you seen what they're saying about us?" "Sit down," Marcus said quietly. "I don't want to sit down. I want to know how we fix this. I want to know how we can make this go away." "We can't make it go away, Richard." The words hung in the air between them. Richard stared at his father, waiting for the punchline, the plan, the magic solution that would restore everything to how it was supposed to be. "What do you mean we can't? We're the Danvers family. We own half this city. We have connections. Lawyers. Power. And Helen Turner has the truth," Marcus said. "She has documents I thought were destroyed 30 years ago. She has testimony from people I thought would never talk. She has evidence of things I did that I barely remember doing because they seemed so insignificant at the time. So what are you saying? We just give up? We just let her take everything?" Marcus looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw himself 30 years ago. The same arrogance. The same certainty that wealth made you untouchable. The same blindness to consequences. "The board wants you to step down," Marcus said. Richard went very still. What? Temporarily. Until this blows over. They think you're too much of a liability right now. A liability? Richard's voice rose. I'm the COO. I've been running operations for 3 years. You can't just... I can, Marcus interrupted. And I am. As of today, you're taking a leave of absence. Paid, of course. But you're out. You don't come to the office. You don't speak to the press. You don't do anything except stay quiet and let our lawyers handle this. Richard's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Dad, you can't do this to me. I'm your son. That's exactly why I'm doing this, Marcus said. Because you're my son, and I won't let you sink with this ship if there's a way to save you. And what about you? Marcus smiled, but there was no humor in it. I built this empire on other people's broken dreams. I always knew there'd be a reckoning eventually. I just thought I'd be dead before it came. Helen sat in her lawyer's office, watching the news coverage on the television mounted to the wall. Every channel was covering the story now. The business networks analyzed the financial implications. The tabloids dug into Richard's personal life, finding scandals that had nothing to do with Helen but were thrown into the mix anyway. The serious journalists did deep dives into corporate fraud and the culture of impunity among the wealthy elite. You've become a symbol, her lawyer said. This isn't just about the mansion anymore. This is about something bigger. Class warfare. Racial justice. Corporate accountability. I just wanted my mother's house back, Helen said quietly. I know. But you've tapped into something. Look. He gestured to the television, where protesters had gathered outside Danvers Global Properties headquarters. They carried signs, Justice for Catherine Turner. No more billionaire thieves. Helen Turner is all of us. Helen felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. She'd prepared for the legal battle. She'd prepared for the media attention. But she hadn't prepared for this, for becoming the face of something so much larger than her mother's story. Her phone buzzed. Another message. She'd received thousands since the interview aired, most supportive, some hateful, all intense. But this one was different. It was from Gerald, the house manager. Miss Turner, I've gathered the employment records you requested. There's more than I thought. Years of wage theft. Discriminatory hiring practices. NDAs forced on staff who witnessed illegal activity. I'd like to testify if you'll have me. Helen showed the message to her lawyer. He smiled grimly. And there it is. The dam is breaking. Once one person comes forward, others follow. That's how these things work. How many more will there be? Helen asked. Before this is over? Dozens, probably. Maybe hundreds. You've given people permission to tell their stories. You've shown them it's possible to fight back and win. Helen looked back at the television, where they were now showing footage from the gala, the moment she'd spoken those 5 words. Someone had recorded it after all. The clip had been viewed 40 million times in the past 24 hours. I own this house now. 5 words that had changed everything. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Marcus Danvers. She answered. Mr. Danvers. Miss Turner. His voice was calm, measured, nothing like the rage she'd expected. I'd like to meet with you. Just the 2 of us. No lawyers. No reporters. I think we should talk. Helen looked at her lawyer, who shook his head vigorously, mouthing, Don't do it. But Helen had come this far by trusting her instincts. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The coffee shop on 5th and Main. Public place. And Mr. Danvers? I'll be recording everything. I expected nothing less, he said and hung up. Helen set down her phone and looked at her reflection in the darkened television screen. The woman staring back at her looked tired but determined. She looked like someone who'd spent 3 years preparing for war and was now right in the middle of it. Are you sure about this? Her lawyer asked. No, Helen admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Because sometimes justice requires sitting across from your enemy and looking them in the eye. Sometimes it required hearing their excuses, their justifications, their desperate attempts to make peace. And sometimes it required saying no. The coffee shop on 5th and Main was unremarkable in every way, which was exactly why Helen had chosen it. Faded vinyl booths. Chipped Formica tables. Coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs instead of artisanal pour-overs. It was the kind of place where billionaires looked out of place, and Helen wanted Marcus Danvers to feel exactly that, out of place. She arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner where she could see the entrance. Her phone sat on the table, the recording app already open. Her lawyer had insisted on having someone nearby, so he sat 3 booths away, pretending to read a newspaper like some character from a 1940s noir film. At exactly 2 p.m., Marcus Danvers walked through the door. He looked older than he had in the photographs Helen had studied over the years. His silver hair was thinner. The lines around his eyes are deeper. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but it couldn't hide the weariness in his posture, the weight of a man watching his legacy crumble. He spotted Helen and walked over, sliding into the booth across from her without asking permission. "Miss Turner," he said. "Mr. Danvers." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people on opposite sides of a decades-old wound, finally face to face. "I'm not here to beg," Marcus said finally. "I'm not here to offer you money to make this go away. I know you're not that kind of person." "Then why are you here?" Marcus looked down at his hands, at the gold wedding ring he still wore even though his wife had left him 6 months ago. Helen had read about that too. Everything about this family was public now, dissected and displayed for the world to judge. "I'm here because I owe you the truth," he said. "Not the truth my lawyers will spin in court. Not the truth the media will distort. Just the truth. Your mother deserved better than what I gave her. She deserved better than what I took from her." Helen said nothing. She'd waited years to hear these words, but now that they were coming, they felt hollow. Empty. Too late. "I was 32 when I met Catherine," Marcus continued. "Ambitious. Ruthless. Convinced that success meant crushing anyone who stood in my way. Your mother was brilliant. Everyone in the industry knew it. And when I saw what she was building, I didn't see a partner. I saw an opportunity." "You saw something you could steal," Helen said flatly. Marcus nodded. "Yes. I convinced myself it was just business. That's what people like me always say, isn't it? It's just business. As if that makes it acceptable. As if profit justifies cruelty." He looked up at her. "I spent 40 years building an empire on that lie. And now my son is paying the price for my sins." "Your son humiliated me in front of 200 people because of the color of my skin," Helen said, her voice hard. "That's not your sin. That's his." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "Richard is exactly what I made him. Entitled. Arrogant. Convinced the world exists to serve him. I taught him that. Every day of his life, I taught him that wealth means you don't have to care about the people you hurt." Helen leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" "I want you to know that I'm not going to fight you," Marcus said. "The board wants to drag this out. The lawyers want to tie you up in litigation for years. They think they can bury you in legal fees and appeals until you give up. But I'm not going to let that happen." "You're surrendering?" "I'm accepting responsibility," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. The estate is yours. It always was. I'll instruct my lawyers to cooperate with the transfer of ownership. The fraud charges, the discrimination lawsuit, all of it, I'll testify if needed. I'll provide whatever documents you require." Helen studied his face, searching for the trap, the angle, the hidden strategy. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "In exchange for what?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "No deals. No conditions. I'm 73 years old, Miss Turner. I don't have many years left, and I'd like to spend them knowing I did at least one right thing in my life." Helen sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd prepared for threats, bribes, legal maneuvering. She hadn't prepared for capitulation. Your son won't accept this, she said finally. My son doesn't have a choice, Marcus replied. I still control the family trust. I still have the final say in all major decisions. Richard is out. The board voted this morning. He's no longer with the company in any capacity. Helen's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it. Breaking. Richard Danvers resigns from Danvers Global Properties amid scandal. He didn't resign, Helen said. You fired him. Does it matter? Either way, he's gone. And maybe that's the best thing that could have happened to him. Maybe losing everything is the only way he'll learn what it means to be human. Marcus stood. The conversation apparently over. He pulled out his wallet and placed a business card on the table. That's my personal attorney. He has instructions to cooperate fully with your legal team. The estate will be transferred to you within 30 days. You have my word. Your word, Helen repeated. Forgive me if I don't find that particularly reassuring. Marcus smiled sadly. I wouldn't either, if I were you. But that's all I have left to give. He turned to leave, then paused. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Miss Turner. I wish I'd been wise enough to see that before I destroyed her. Don't let what I did to her destroy you too. Don't let revenge consume the rest of your life. This isn't revenge, Helen said quietly. This is justice. There's a difference. Marcus nodded slowly. I hope you're right. Then he walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Helen alone with the weight of everything that had just changed. 3 weeks later, Helen stood in front of the mansion for the first time as its legal owner. The court had ruled in her favor that morning, a formality given Marcus Danvers's cooperation but satisfying nonetheless. The judge had been thorough, reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, before declaring that the property rightfully belonged to Catherine Turner's estate and therefore to her sole heir, Helen. The media had been outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Helen had given a brief statement, thanking her legal team and dedicating the victory to her mother's memory. Then she'd gotten into her car and driven here, to the house her mother had built. Gerald was waiting at the entrance, exactly as she'd asked. He'd stayed on as house manager during the transition, and Helen had already offered him a permanent position under new terms. Fair wages, actual benefits, and the respect he deserved. Miss Turner, he said, opening the door. Welcome home. Helen stepped inside and stopped, overwhelmed by the reality of it. This was hers now. Her mother's dream, reclaimed. She walked through the entrance hall, running her hand along the walls Catherine had designed, looking up at the ceiling moldings she'd specified, seeing her mother's vision finally understood. There's something I think you should see, Gerald said, leading her upstairs to a room she'd never entered during her time working here. When the Danvers family cleared out, we found this. It was hidden behind a panel in the wall of what used to be Mr. Marcus's office. He opened the door to reveal a small storage room filled with boxes. Helen stepped inside, and immediately saw what Gerald meant. The boxes were labeled in her mother's handwriting, Turner estate plans, Catherine's personal documents, original deeds and contracts. Everything. Her mother had hidden everything before she'd been forced out, creating an insurance policy that had taken 30 years to pay out. Helen opened one of the boxes and found blueprints, sketches, notes in her mother's precise architectural hand. Photographs of the mansion under construction, Catherine standing proud in front of her creation. Letters to Helen, dated but never sent, explaining what had happened, asking for forgiveness for leaving her daughter with such a burden. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a normal childhood, one letter read. I'm sorry I let them break me. But Helen, my beautiful girl, don't let them break you. Fight back. Reclaim what's ours. Show them that the Turner women don't stay down. Helen pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I did it, Mom, she whispered. I got it back. I got your house back. 2 months later, the Turner Foundation for Workplace Justice held its inaugural event in the mansion's ballroom, the same room where Richard Danvers had tried to destroy Helen. But now the space was transformed. Instead of velvet ropes and exclusivity, there were tables filled with community members, workers' rights advocates, and people who'd faced discrimination in their own workplaces. Helen stood at a podium, looking out at the crowd. Gerald stood nearby, proud in his new position as the foundation's operations manager. Her lawyer sat in the front row, grinning. And throughout the room were faces Helen had come to know over the past weeks. Former Danvers employees who'd come forward with their own stories, activists who'd championed her cause, reporters who'd helped expose the truth. "This foundation exists because my mother believed in justice," Helen said. "Because she believed that talent and hard work should matter more than the color of your skin or the size of your bank account. We'll be providing legal assistance to workers facing discrimination, offering grants to people who've been pushed out of their careers by corporate greed, creating pathways for marginalized communities to access opportunities that have been systematically denied to them." The applause was thunderous. Helen smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the room, in the walls she'd designed, in the dream she'd built. "We're starting with an endowment of $50 million, Helen continued. $20 million from the sale of Danvers assets that are being liquidated as part of the fraud settlement. $30 million from my own portion of the estate." She paused. "My mother lost everything building this house. Now this house will help make sure others don't lose everything too." Across town, Richard Danvers sat in a small apartment he'd rented with what little money he had left. His trust fund had been frozen pending the outcome of the civil suits against him. His friends had disappeared. His social media accounts were deactivated after the constant harassment. He'd been forced to sell his car, his watch, everything that had once defined him. He'd spent the first month in denial, convinced his father would fix everything, that the family lawyers would make it all go away. But slowly, reality had set in. The empire was gone. His position was gone. The life he'd known was gone. He watched Helen's speech on his laptop, the only possession he hadn't sold yet. Watched her stand in what used to be his ballroom. Watched her transform his humiliation into something meaningful. "She won," he said to his empty apartment. "She actually won." For the first time in his life, Richard Danvers understood what it meant to lose everything. And in that understanding, the first small seed of something that might eventually become wisdom began to take root. He thought about Helen's words that night. "I own this house now." 5 words that had changed both their lives. 5 words that had revealed the truth about who had power and who merely borrowed it from others. Richard closed his laptop and looked around his bare apartment. He had no idea what came next. No idea how to be a person without wealth to define him. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Maybe losing everything was the only way he'd learn to build something real. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters by 7 a.m., 3 hours before the hearing was scheduled to begin. News vans lined the street. Satellite dishes pointed at the sky like flowers seeking sun. Protesters held signs on one side of the plaza, "Justice for Catherine Turner." Counter-protesters gathered on the other, "Stop the witch hunt against job creators." Helen arrived at 8:30, flanked by her legal team. She wore a navy blue suit, her mother's pearl earrings, and an expression of calm determination that had become her trademark over the past months. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. She ignored them all and walked up the steps, her head high. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. This wasn't just another civil case. This had become a referendum on wealth, power, and accountability. Every major news outlet had sent their legal correspondents. The gallery was packed with people who'd lined up since dawn for a chance to witness history. Helen took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Her lead attorney, Margaret Chen, was already organizing documents, her movements efficient and precise. They'd spent 6 months preparing for this day, building a case so airtight that even the Danvers family's army of lawyers couldn't find a crack. Across the aisle, the defense table was conspicuously empty except for 2 lawyers. Marcus Danvers had made good on his promise not to fight, but the board of directors had other ideas. They'd hired their own counsel, desperate to salvage what remained of Danvers' global properties. Richard wasn't present. He'd been advised not to attend, his lawyers fearing what he might say or do. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff called out, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and a reputation for suffering neither fools nor corporate malfeasance. She'd been a civil rights attorney before ascending to the bench, and her rulings on discrimination cases had set precedents across the state. "Please be seated," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Let me be clear from the outset. This courtroom will maintain decorum. I will tolerate no outbursts, no theatrics, and no disrespect. We are here to examine the facts and render justice. Nothing more, nothing less." She looked at both tables. "Ms. Chen, you may begin." Margaret stood, buttoning her jacket. "Your Honor, over the next several hours, we will present evidence that demonstrates a pattern of fraud, corruption, and illegal business practices spanning 4 decades. We will show that Marcus Danvers systematically destroyed Catherine Turner's architectural firm through fraudulent contracts, manufactured debt, and bribery of her business partners. We will prove that the Danvers mansion, currently the subject of this dispute, was obtained through illegal means and rightfully belongs to the Turner estate." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her illuminated with a document. "This is the original deed to the property, signed by Catherine Turner on March 15, 1985. She purchased the land and oversaw construction of the mansion, financing it through her successful firm, Turner Architectural Design." More documents appeared. Contracts, bank statements, construction permits, all bearing Catherine's signature, all proving her ownership. "Now," Margaret continued, "this is where it gets interesting." In 1987, 2 years after construction was completed, Catherine Turner's firm began experiencing financial difficulties. Clients mysteriously withdrew contracts. Banks suddenly called in loans. Business partners unexpectedly sold their shares. She paused. None of this was accidental. The next slide showed a series of emails. These communications, recovered from archived servers, show Marcus Danvers coordinating with Catherine Turner's business partners. He offered them positions in his company if they would sabotage Turner Architectural from the inside. He paid competitors to underbid Catherine's proposals. He spread rumors about the structural integrity of her buildings. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Morrison's gavel came down once. Silence. Margaret continued for 2 hours, methodically building her case. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Forged documents that had transferred Catherine's assets to shell corporations Marcus controlled. Testimony from former employees who'd been paid to stay silent for decades but were now willing to speak. The defense attorneys objected repeatedly, but Judge Morrison overruled them each time. The evidence was too solid, too well documented, too damning. Then came the recording from the gala. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit 47, Margaret said. "This is an audio recording from the evening of October 12th of this year, the night this case truly began." The courtroom fell silent as Richard Danvers's voice filled the space. "You people always have such polite little phrases, don't you? I think they're scraping the bottom of the barrel these days. Probably pulled you straight out of some public housing project and stuck you in an apron." Helen sat perfectly still, reliving that moment. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, 200 people in the courtroom heard what she'd endured. Heard the contempt, racism, the casual cruelty. "I want her fired. Right now. Tonight." When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Even the defense attorneys looked uncomfortable. "This recording," Margaret said quietly, "demonstrates the culture that the Danvers family created. A culture where black women are treated as less than human. Where workers are disposable. Where power means the right to humiliate anyone you consider beneath you." She turned to face the gallery. Helen Turner endured this abuse while working in the house her mother built. The house that was stolen from her family. And when she revealed the truth, when she spoke 5 words that challenged that power, the Danvers family's house of cards began to collapse. The defense called their witnesses after lunch, but it was a half-hearted effort. They argued that the business dealings between Marcus Danvers and Catherine Turner were complicated, that the documents could be interpreted multiple ways, that the statute of limitations should apply. Judge Morrison listened patiently, then asked a single question that destroyed their entire defense. "Counsel, are you arguing that fraud has a time limit?" The defense attorney stammered. "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then sit down." By 4 p.m., both sides had rested. Judge Morrison called a 30-minute recess to review the evidence, though everyone in the courtroom knew she'd already made her decision. The facts were too clear. The pattern is too obvious. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison looked directly at Helen. "Ms. Turner, would you like to make a statement before I render my judgment?" Helen hadn't planned to speak, but she stood, feeling the weight of the moment, the weight of her mother's memory, the weight of everyone who'd ever been silenced by power. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "my mother died believing she was a failure. She died thinking she'd lost everything because she wasn't smart enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough. But that wasn't true. She lost everything because the Danvers family decided her success was inconvenient. They decided her dream should belong to them instead." Helen looked around the courtroom, at the faces watching her, listening. "For 30 years, I carried her shame. I watched her break down, watched her give up, watched her fade away. And I promised myself that one day, I would tell the truth. That one day, people would know what really happened." Her voice grew stronger. "This case isn't just about a mansion or money or even justice for my mother, though that matters more than anything. This case is about whether we live in a world where the wealthy can take whatever they want from whoever they want, or whether we live in a world where everyone, regardless of their bank account or their skin color, has the right to keep what they've built." She turned to Judge Morrison. "My mother designed that house to be beautiful. She wanted it to represent possibility, achievement, the American dream. And then it became a symbol of everything wrong with that dream, of how easily it can be stolen by people with more power and fewer morals. I'm not here to destroy the Danvers family. I'm here to reclaim my mother's legacy and make sure that house finally represents what she intended, that talent and hard work and dignity matter more than inherited wealth." The courtroom was silent. Helen sat down, her hands shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked at both tables. "I've reviewed the evidence presented today, and frankly, I'm appalled. The documentation of fraud is overwhelming. The pattern of illegal business practices is undeniable. And the audio recording demonstrates a culture of discrimination that cannot be tolerated in any workplace, much less in a family that has presented itself as a pillar of this community." She put her glasses back on and read from her notes. "Therefore, I rule as follows. The property known as the Danvers estate is hereby restored to the Turner family and awarded to Helen Turner as the sole heir of Catherine Turner. All claims by Marcus Danvers and Danvers Global Properties to said property are null and void." Cheers erupted in the gallery. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. "Order! I'm not finished." The room quieted. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "I am ordering a full audit of Danvers Global Properties to be conducted by an independent accounting firm appointed by this court. Any assets determined to have been obtained through fraudulent means will be subject to seizure and restitution. Additionally, I am referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution." The defense attorneys looked stricken. This was worse than losing. This was complete demolition. "Ms. Turner," Judge Morrison said, "your mother would be proud of you. Justice delayed is not justice denied when someone has the courage to fight for it. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down for the final time. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Helen's legal team surrounded her, congratulating, celebrating. Margaret hugged her tightly, whispering, "We did it. We actually did it." Helen stood in the middle of the chaos, feeling strangely calm. It was over. After years of planning, months of legal battle, decades of injustice, it was finally over. Outside, Helen gave a brief statement to the press. "Today, justice was served. Not just for my mother, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter because they don't have money or power or the right last name. The Turner Foundation will continue its work helping others fight the battles my mother couldn't win. And the Danvers mansion will become a symbol of something new, that stolen dreams can be reclaimed, that truth eventually emerges, and that one person standing up can change everything." That evening, Helen returned to the mansion, now legally and irrevocably hers. She walked through the rooms alone, talking to her mother as if Catherine could hear her. "I got it back, Mom. Your house. Your dream. Everything they took from you." She stood in the ballroom where it had all begun. And I'm going to make sure it stands for everything you believed in. Justice. Dignity. The idea that what you build with your own hands can't be taken away forever. She pulled out her phone and called her accountant. I want to transfer $30 million to the Turner Foundation's endowment. Make it happen tomorrow. Ms. Turner, are you sure? That's more than half of your liquid assets. I'm sure, Helen said. My mother didn't build this house to make me rich. She built it to prove something could be beautiful and meaningful. The foundation will honor that better than any bank account ever could. She ended the call and stood in the silence of her mother's creation, feeling the weight of victory and responsibility settling on her shoulders in equal measure. The Danvers empire had fallen. Justice had been served. And now came the harder part, building something worthy of the fight. 6 months after the verdict, Helen received an invitation she'd never expected. A request to appear on 60 Minutes, the most watched news program in the country. They wanted to tell her full story, from the night of the gala to the courtroom victory to the work she was doing now. She almost said no. The legal battle was over. The mansion was hers. The foundation was operating. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to do. Did she really need to relive it all on national television? But then she thought about the emails she received daily. Hundreds of them, from people who'd seen themselves in her story. Workers who'd been mistreated. Women of color who'd been told they didn't belong. People who'd had their dreams stolen by those with more power. If I do this, she told the producer, I want to talk about them. Not just me. Not just my mother. All of them. That's exactly why we want you, the producer replied. The interview took place in the mansion's library, a room Catherine had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in streams of afternoon light. Helen sat in a chair her mother had sketched in the original plans, facing Leslie Stahl, the veteran journalist whose interviews had toppled presidents and exposed corruption for decades. Helen Turner, Leslie began. 6 months ago, you were working as a maid in this very house. Today, you own it. How did that transformation happen? Helen smiled softly. It didn't happen in 6 months. It happened over 30 years ago. The night of the gala wasn't the beginning of my story. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent watching my mother suffer for something that wasn't her fault, and deciding I wouldn't let that suffering be meaningless. Tell us about your mother. Helen's expression softened with memory. Catherine Turner was the most brilliant person I've ever known. She could look at an empty lot and see a palace. She could sketch a design in 5 minutes that other architects would spend weeks trying to perfect. And she believed, truly believed, that talent was enough. That if you were good at what you did, if you worked hard and treated people fairly, success would follow. But it didn't? No. Because she didn't account for people like Marcus Danvers. People who saw her success not as inspiration but as something to exploit. Something to take. Leslie leaned forward. The night of the gala, when Richard Danvers humiliated you in front of 200 guests, what were you thinking? Helen took a breath, remembering. I was thinking about my mother. About how many times she must have stood in rooms like that, being dismissed, being underestimated, being told she didn't belong. And I was thinking that this time, it would end differently. This time, the person being underestimated would win. 5 words, Leslie said. That's all it took. I own this house now. Why those words? Because they were true, Helen said simply. And because sometimes truth is the most powerful weapon we have. Richard Danvers thought he could humiliate me with impunity. He thought his wealth made him untouchable. Those 5 words shattered that illusion. The interview continued for an hour, Helen describing the legal battle, the public scrutiny, the moment Judge Morrison read her verdict. But the most powerful moment came when Leslie asked about the recording from the gala. We're going to play a portion of it now, Leslie warned. Are you comfortable with that? Helen nodded, bracing herself. Richard's voice filled the room once again. You people always have such polite little phrases, don't you? I think they're scraping the bottom of the barrel these days. Probably pulled you straight out of some public housing project and stuck you in an apron. The recording stopped. Leslie's face was tight with controlled anger. How did you maintain your composure during that? Years of practice, Helen said quietly. That wasn't the first time I'd been spoken to that way. It wasn't even the worst time. It was just the first time I was ready to fight back. What do you want people to understand about that moment? Helen looked directly at the camera, speaking to the millions who would watch this. I want them to understand that what happened to me happens every day. In offices, in restaurants, in courtrooms, in schools. People are dismissed because of their skin color, their gender, their accent, their zip code. And most of the time, those people have to swallow their anger and move on because they can't afford to fight back. They can't risk losing their jobs, their homes, their stability. Her voice grew stronger. I could fight back because I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. But most people aren't in that position. So I'm using my platform, my resources, and my story to fight for them. That's what the Turner Foundation is about. Giving people the tools to stand up for themselves when the system is designed to keep them down. Leslie paused, then asked the question everyone wanted answered. Do you hate Richard Danvers? Helen considered this. No. I don't hate him. I pity him. He's 33 years old and he's never had to build anything himself, never had to struggle, never had to learn empathy or humility. His father gave him everything except the tools to be a decent human being. In a way, he's as much a victim of that system as anyone else. That's remarkably gracious. It's honest, Helen corrected. Hate would eat me alive. I watched it eat my mother alive. I refuse to let the Danvers family take anything else from the Turner women. Not our dignity, not our peace, and certainly not our future. The interview ended with Helen walking through the mansion, showing the design details her mother had created, explaining how each room would now serve the Foundation's mission. The ballroom where she'd been humiliated would host fundraisers for workers' rights. The dining room where Richard had sat like a king would feed community organizers planning their next campaigns. The mansion itself would become a training center, teaching people how to navigate hostile corporate environments, how to document discrimination, and how to fight back legally and effectively. My mother built this house as a dream, Helen said, standing in the entrance hall beneath the chandelier. Marcus Danvers turned it into a nightmare. I'm transforming it into a weapon for justice. The interview aired on a Sunday evening and was watched by 35 million people. By Monday morning, it had been viewed another 20 million times online. #Helen Turner trended worldwide. The Foundation's website crashed from traffic. Donation requests flooded in. People wanted to help, wanted to be part of the change Helen represented. But not everyone celebrated. In his small apartment, Richard Danvers watched the interview alone. He'd lost weight over the past months. His designer clothes had been replaced with thrift store finds. His expensive watch was long gone, sold to pay rent. He looked like a different person, and in many ways, he was. He listened to Helen describe him with pity rather than anger, and something inside him cracked. Not the defensive anger he'd been carrying for months, but something deeper. Shame. Real, genuine shame for who he'd been and what he'd done. The next morning, he did something he'd never done before. He got a job. A real job, not an executive position handed to him because of his last name. He applied to work at a community center in a low-income neighborhood, helping kids with their homework, organizing sports programs, doing the kind of basic, unglamorous work he'd once thought was beneath him. Why do you want this job? The director asked during his interview. You're Richard Danvers. I'm nobody, Richard interrupted. That's the point. I need to learn what it means to be nobody so I can figure out how to be somebody worth being. The director studied him for a long moment, then said, You're hired. Minimum wage, 40 hours a week. And if you're late even once, you're fired. No special treatment. Thank you, Richard said, and meant it. A year after the verdict, Helen stood on the steps of the mansion, now officially designated as the Turner Center for Justice and Equity. Behind her, the building gleamed in the morning sun, restored to her mother's original vision. Ahead of her, 500 people gathered for the grand opening. Community organizers, workers' rights advocates, journalists, politicians, and regular people who'd been inspired by her story. Gerald stood beside her, now the center's executive director, earning 3 times what he'd made as the Danvers house manager. Former employees of the Danvers family who'd come forward with their own stories staffed the center, finally able to work in an environment that valued them. Helen approached the microphone, looking out at the crowd, at the cameras broadcasting this moment around the world, at the future her mother had never lived to see. 1 year ago, she began, I stood in a ballroom and spoke 5 words that changed my life. But those words didn't just change my life. They became a symbol for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. Everyone who's been dismissed, degraded, or destroyed by people with more power and less conscience. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. My mother built this house with her hands and her genius. It was stolen from her by greed. Today, we reclaim it not just for the Turner family, but for everyone who's ever had something stolen by those who believed wealth gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. She gestured to the building behind her. This center will provide free legal assistance to workers facing discrimination. We'll offer training programs for people trying to break into industries that have traditionally excluded them. We'll document cases of corporate fraud and work with law enforcement to hold the powerful accountable. And we'll create a community where people can share their stories without fear, knowing they'll be believed and supported. Her voice rose with passion. They say justice delayed is justice denied. But I say justice delayed is justice amplified. Because every day my mother waited, every year I prepared, every moment of silence built toward this. Toward a reckoning. Toward change. Toward a world where no one else has to lose what we lost. The crowd erupted in applause. Helen smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the spring breeze, in the sunlight warming the stone steps, in the building that had finally found its true purpose. My mother used to tell me that architecture isn't just about buildings, Helen continued when the applause faded. It's about creating spaces where people can become who they're meant to be, where dreams have room to grow, where justice has a foundation to stand on. She looked at the mansion, then back at the crowd. This building is that space now. And everyone here, everyone watching, everyone who's ever felt powerless, you are welcome here. Your stories matter. Your struggles matter. You matter. Helen stepped back from the microphone as the crowd surged forward, people wanting to shake her hand, share their stories, thank her for giving them hope. She greeted them all, listening to each person, seeing her mother's legacy in every face. That evening, Helen returned to the small apartment she'd kept despite owning the mansion. She'd turned most of the estate into the center's headquarters, keeping only a modest suite of rooms for herself when she needed to stay overnight for events. She preferred it this way. The mansion was never meant to be a home, not anymore. It was meant to be a beacon. She sat at her desk, reviewing applications for the foundation's first round of grants, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Ms. Turner. The voice was hesitant, uncertain. This is Richard Danvers. Helen sat up straighter, surprised. They hadn't spoken since the gala, though she'd heard through mutual connections that he was working at a community center, that he'd been living quietly, avoiding the spotlight. Mr. Danvers, I saw the opening ceremony today. On the news. He paused, searching for words. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know it's too late. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did or what my family did. But I needed to say it anyway. You deserved better. Your mother deserved better. And I was wrong. About everything. Helen closed her eyes, processing this. Thank you for saying that. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Richard continued quickly. I don't deserve it. I'm trying to be better. To do better. The job at the community center, it's teaching me things I should have learned 30 years ago. And I wanted you to know that what you did, taking back that house, exposing my family's corruption, didn't just destroy us. It saved me. It gave me a chance to become someone worth being. Then don't waste it, Helen said quietly. Use it. Help people. Actually make a difference instead of just talking about it. I will. I promise I will. The call ended. Helen sat in silence for a moment, then returned to the grant applications. There was work to do. There would always be work to do. But for the first time in her life, It was work that mattered. Work that honored her mother's memory. Work that changed lives. 5 years later, the Turner Center had helped over 10,000 people fight workplace discrimination. They'd won settlements totaling over $200 million. They'd trained 3,000 workers in their rights. They'd changed laws in 6 states. And they'd inspired similar centers in 12 other cities. Helen appeared at conferences, gave speeches, and wrote articles. But her favorite moments were the quiet ones. Sitting with someone who'd just lost their job unfairly, helping them understand they had options. Celebrating when someone won their case. Watching people walk out of the center with their dignity restored. She was in her office one afternoon when Gerald knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's important." A woman in her 60s entered, carrying a portfolio. "Ms. Turner? My name is Dorothy Chen. I worked with your mother in the 1980s. I was one of her junior architects." Helen stood, shaking her hand. "Please, sit down. How can I help you?" Dorothy opened the portfolio, revealing sketches and designs. "When I heard what you'd done, reclaiming the mansion, starting the foundation, I realized I still had these. Designs your mother created but never got to build. I thought maybe it was time they saw the light of day." Helen looked at the sketches, seeing her mother's vision in every line. Community centers. Affordable housing. Parks designed for accessibility. Buildings meant to uplift rather than intimidate. "She had so many ideas," Dorothy said softly. "So many dreams beyond just the mansion. Marcus Danvers took that one from her, but these remained. Hidden. Waiting." Helen touched the drawings gently, feeling the connection to her mother across the years. "Would you help me build them? Would you oversee the projects, make sure they're done the way she intended?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "I would be honored." And so Catherine Turner's legacy grew beyond a single mansion, beyond a single foundation, into something larger. Buildings that served communities. Spaces that welcomed everyone. Architecture that embodied justice. On the 10th anniversary of the night Helen spoke those 5 words, she returned to the ballroom where it all began. The room was filled now with people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Workers who'd won their cases. Students who'd received scholarships. Families who'd found housing in buildings designed by Catherine Turner's reclaimed plans. Helen stood at the same spot where she'd faced Richard Danvers, where she'd been humiliated and dismissed, where she'd found the courage to fight back. "Sometimes," she said to the gathered crowd, "all it takes is one person to change the world. One person willing to stand up. One person refused to be silent. One person who believes that justice matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than peace, that dignity matters more than acceptance." She looked around the room, at faces of every color, every background, every story. My mother was that person once. She tried to change the world through her buildings, through her vision of what architecture could be. They broke her for trying. But they couldn't break what she built in me. The determination. The belief that we deserve better. The certainty that one person, standing in the right place at the right time, saying the right words, can change everything. Helen smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift, feeling the possibility of the future open before her. "I own this house now. But more importantly, we all own this moment. We all have the power to stand up, to speak truth, to demand justice. And when we do it together, nothing can stop us. Not wealth, not power, not the people who believe we don't matter." She raised her glass. "To my mother, Catherine Turner, who built this house. To everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. And to the future we're building together, one voice, one stand, one moment of courage at a time." The room erupted in applause, in celebration, in the sound of people who'd found their power and refused to let it go. Helen Turner had reclaimed her mother's house. But more than that, she'd reclaimed something larger. The right to be seen, to be heard, to matter. And in doing so, she'd shown countless others that they had that right too. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change the world. And sometimes, that one person is you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, Wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.